Here we go again, Metal Maniacs. Welcome back to another video from the Essential Albums series. It has been a while since I tackled a particular geographical area. I think the last one was the Italian doom metal scene, if I'm not mistaken. This time round, I'm delving deeper, not only in the scene of one country, but two whole regions. One of which is actually a continent on its own. And I am obviously referring to Central and South America. In general, the majority of metalheads from Europe and the US only know a handful of bands from the 80s from these areas, but in truth there was a somewhat unexpected wealth of rock bands formed all around Latin America during the 70s and laying the potential for heavy metal in the early 80s. Nowadays every country has seen an explosion of bands, but back then things were a lot harder to come by. These early metal artists pioneered not only a sound in their respective countries, but a true counterculture as well. However blue collar and socially outcast metal's origins were, the genre was a product of the wealthiest and most prosperous society on earth, that is Europe and the US. Meanwhile, the fans of musicians of Latin America faced a very different reality. So as usual, sit tight and let's go to discover some 80s classics straight from the southern West Hemisphere. Let's go! Thanks for joining us again for this video. If you are new here, the aim of this channel is to review albums and festivals, suggest bands, delve in the cultural aspect of heavy metal in general and more. So if you're interested in this content, please consider supporting us, supporting this channel by subscribing, liking and sharing our videos on social media. So there are 21 countries throughout both South and Central America. Countries which throughout the 80s saw 5 civil wars, mainly in Central America, 1 regular war, which was the Falklands War, foreign interventions, and 10 military dictatorships, infamous for their brutality along with high poverty and crime rates. While significant differences between countries exist, the bottom line for the region is that hundreds of years of colonization, foreign intervention, corruption, racism, etc. resulted in weak governments, segregated societies, poverty and rampant violence. When you wonder why the region struggles to this day, it may be summed up with this: a legacy of violence and repression. History apart though, in this video I will be examining the traditional metal scene of varied Latin American countries. Unfortunately, information on most of the bands is lacking because it's really hard to find it due to poor documentation. A lot of information is sadly lost to time, and all of the bands on this list release music in their native tongue, bar a few minor exceptions, perhaps a factor in their limited exposure to the wider metal scene. I can say there's a unifying theme among these artists, but a few of them in line with Latin America's Nueva Canción movement, which was a left-wing socialist movement and musical genre in Iberian America and the Iberian Peninsula, characterized by folk-inspired styles and socially committed lyrics as well. This movement had a political social theme, and most were seen with disdain and distrust from conservative circles of society. In some cases, this resulted in beatings, venue raids and imprisonment by the police. This is worth stressing again, several of these bands were true voices of a counterculture against the repressive hand of the church and murderous forces of the state. Their lyrics actually meant something. if only for the few thousand people who stood behind the music. So with that necessary introduction out of the way, it is time to turn our attention to the essential albums. Again, like in the latest videos, I'm ranking them chronologically from the latest to the earliest. And the first record is the self-titled album by Megaton, released in 1988 by Discogas. Megaton come from Mexico and were formed in 1986, and this is their only full-length record, and for sure they left a mark on the whole Mexican scene, it seems, apparently, from what I have read. Apparently this cover art, which I kind of like, is that really Skeletor on the front, I think so, can often be seen painted on leather jackets, denim vests, even vans owned by Mexican metalheads. Not that Mexico is new to heavy metal. Throughout the years there were a number of bands who have had some success in both the US and Europe, but I'm sure this band influenced a lot of local youngsters at the time to grab an instrument, and they obtained that kind of cult following generally reserved to bands who are pioneers in the genre in their own country. The music here is a bit Deep Purple, a bit Riot, and a bit Accept. Great combination, of course. This record is nothing short of great as well. Its only fault is the production. The vocals tend to be much higher in the mix than the rest of the instruments. The tracks could have been much more powerful, and they could have been more driven with a better mix. 1988 saw the release of another great record in the Mexican scene, and that was Larga Vida al Metal by the band Ramses, but I still prefer Megaton myself, so decided to add them instead. Favorite track on here is El Precio. Off to Argentina now with the self-titled album by Rata Blanca, released in 1988 with Vertigo Records. Coming from the latter years of the 80s and following a list of bands which opened the doors of heavy metal in this region, Rata Blanca decided to reinvent this approach, mixing it with neoclassical touches, excellent power metal blasts, creative, innovative and inspired lyrics. That is why one of the biggest influence here is Yngwie Malmsteen. But there are also touches of Rainbow and Deep Purple, that kind of hard rock with a more virtuoso heavy metal guitar playing by Walter Giardino, who was previously with another band which I will mention later on this list. Just check out the instrumental. Malmsteen influenced Preludio Obsessivo, on which Giardino really shines, showing everyone why he is one of the best shredders, at least in South America, but for me even beyond. It also features some strong vocals and a spectacular lineup of musicians, all delivering some outstanding performances, surpassing any heavy metal band of that time, because they weren't more of the same thing. Rata Blanca was the band which made the difference in the heavy metal scene of this region. There are also parts when the vocalist uses that falsetto technique, so synonymous in heavy metal with King Diamond, which really gives some added power to this record. Just listen to the track Rompe el Hechizo, which translates to Breaking the Spell, and you can understand what I am referring to here. Another highlight here is El Sueño de la Gitana, The Gypsy Dream, Chico Calejero, Street Boy, and the closer and longest track on this record, El Ultimo Ataque, The Last Attack. Production could have been a bit better as well, but nothing that won't let you enjoy this great record. Next in line is the self-titled album by the band Kraken, released in 1987 with Codiscos. Kraken are not only Colombia's premier classic metal band, but they are one of the biggest in all of Latin America. They originally formed in 1984 and immediately gripped the region with their gritty and spirited take on heavy metal. The biggest influence here is undoubtedly Iron Maiden. One of the album's defining traits is the ample use of a dual guitar, harmonies lifted straight out of the Murray and Smith playbook. The songs steer from slower paced, almost ballad-like tracks like Soy Real to veering into epic territory with the triumphant sounding Escudo y Espada, a track which fully displays the aforementioned twin guitar a tech at its finest. Yet, the biggest trace of Maiden's presence here remains the vocals presented by vocalist Elkin Ramirez, aka El Titan. There is a reason why he is dubbed the Colombian Bruce Dickinson, as his singing style is eerily reminiscent of him in many occasions, particularly when he attempts to hit the high notes, and having an almost theatrical quality to it. This in spite of the thin production job on this record and on most of the records on this list. While musically competent, what makes this album so special is the optimism it communicates. As with other Latin American peers, Kraken's lyrics were not the standard escapist fantasy themes that were commonplace in heavy metal, but rather ones that dealt with society and self-reflection. Rather than just angrily rail against the system in place, Elkin's lyrics were more of a poetic nature. They dealt with the need to persevere in spite of the challenges present and the rotten state of society. Nada ha cambiato aún deals with the desperation of daily working life and the hope for a better tomorrow. Perhaps Kraken's most famous song, Muere Libre, is an energetic and spirited anthem that calls for the people to fight for their dreams. Unfortunately, Elkin passed away in 2017, but the legacy of Kraken continues to this day, and Elkin was such a revered figure in his hometown of Medellin that after his passing, his family received a letter from then President Juan Manuel Santos, thanking him for his musical contributions. The city also carried out a funeral procession for him. Favorite track on this album is the already mentioned Escudo y Espada. Fourth record, and this time for the self-titled album by Ultimatum, released in 1986 with CBS Records. Possibly the surprise inclusion in this list, not because this is not quality heavy metal, but it is not one of those that is often spoken about when referring to Latin American 80s metal. Nonetheless, this is truly a hidden gem. They remind me a lot of 80s Scorpions with the accessible yet guitar-driven sound and some keyboard sounds in certain parts, although as far as I know, no keyboardist is credited on this record. The true highlight here though is Marcela Gonzalez's vocals. So powerful and emotional. They really give so much attitude to the music. Maybe because they have the same Spanish language in common, but she reminds me a lot of Azucena from the Spanish band Santa, which I had included in the 80s Spanish metal Essential Albums video. Check that out if you haven't done so yet. Marcela's vocals are a bit cleaner and she reaches some real high notes, just like on the track Merodiador, which translates to Prowler. This track has a great guitar solo as well. Returning to the vocal comparisons, both vocalists have the same attitude and aggressiveness, not to mention the emotions in the vocals, which at times remind me of Doris Norton from Italian prog rock legends Iacula. Check out the vocals on the ballad Esclava del Silencio. After releasing another record in 1989, the band disbanded a year later and reunited in 2015 and released a new record in 2020, although Marcela left shortly afterwards. Favorite track on this album is Llegare por Ti. We remain in Mexico and we also remain in 1986, and this time I bring you the band Luzbel with the album Pasaporte all'Infierno, released with Com Rock. Luzbel is probably the most known and best regarded 80s metal Mexican band. Formed by guitarist Raúl Fernández Greñas, Luzbel grew to be one of the region's most influential bands. Raúl himself spent some time in the UK during the new wave of British heavy metal and even tried his hand at success there with the band Red, who only released one demo in 1981 before dissolving. Despite the lack of success in the UK, Raúl returned to his native Mexico with fresh ideas, and Luzbel became a driving force in the country's metal scene. Pasaporte all'Infierno is the successful follow-up to Luzbel's seminal metal Caído del Cielo EP. Relative to its predecessor, this one picks up the pace and follows a more aggressive speed metal-oriented mold. Kind of a mix between speed metal and new wave of British heavy metal with a more operatic approach to vocals. Something that stands out in this record is the bass playing, courtesy of Antonio La Rana Morante. It really gives a frantic feel to the music. It actually takes center stage at times, not something usual for a bassist to do unless your name is Geezer Butler, of course. Check out Los Hios del Metal as a prime example of this. All in all, this album has a very menacing vibe, almost horror-like, as the album cover seems to suggest as well. Favorite track on here would probably be the fastest one, which is Atrapado en el Metal, or Trapped in Metal in English. And you know what, we ain't complaining either if we are trapped in metal. Over the years the band disbanded and reunited a couple of times, the last one being in 2012, and up to this day they're still active and have released a further 2 records in 2013 and 2016. And yet another Mexican band, and last one on this list, released in 1985 with Disco Gas, is the record Espadas de Cristal by Cristal y Acero. Cristal y Acero play a mix of hard rock, classic heavy metal and early power metal. The band are best known for their album Kuman, which was released in 1984 and which formed the basis of a fantasy rock opera. I can't tell if it's the band's own creation or an adaptation, but it was a huge hit back in the day, and it is still hailed as a classic in Mexican rock. They may have had the biggest outreach out of all these bands due to this performance. Although Kuman is their most famous, it has too many elements related to a more mainstream sound. So I decided to go for their third record, as it really captures that 80s hard rock metal feel. An interesting thing is that this is the only record on here that has some English lyrics in it. On Soy Rocker, they sound like a rock and roll group, and on we got The Motion and You Are The One. They had a weird new wave vibe with a touch of Kiss from the early 80s. But like I said before, there is mostly good metal on this album. For example, the Fierce Demolition is pure metal, Rompiendo Cadenas has a Baron Rojo feel. The title track is again very heavy and has a couple of guitar solos that will make your ears bleed. In conclusion, I would like to mention the ballad Don't You Go Away, which is very reminiscent of UFO and Scorpions. Anyway, a good album that still remains somewhat hidden behind the more famous earlier works of this band. Favorite track is Espadas de Cristal. Moving on to 1983, and we return to Argentina with the band V8 and their album Luchando por el Metal, released with Umbral Records and Cintas. A band named V8 can only start a record with the sound of a car engine revving up. As cheesy as that might sound, for me these additions really add character to the music. And in fact, Destrucción has become a metal hymn for Argentinian metalheads, as it holds all the characteristics that make V8 so great. Walter from Rata, Blanca, which I mentioned previously, was briefly with this band in 1985. And what is so great about this band? First and foremost, the perfect mix of speed metal with traditional metal. Think Motorhead and Venom, because this record here carries that gritty and dirty sound. V8 were regarded as dangerous and unruly, despised by the local music business for their attitude and their sound, which they barely consider music. The band saw themselves as more comrades with the punks and were nearly jailed due to some issues with a studio. V8 aptly titled their first album Luchando por el Metal, or Fighting for Metal. There's even a whole book written on the band and the stories revolving around their history. On Si Puedes Vencer al Temor, you can hear sounds which bring to mind Black Sabbath's music from the early 70s albums. It has a colossal sludgy riff, and then at one point it speeds up to bring back that frantic feel so synonymous with these kinds of albums. I really wish new bands would incorporate these kind of tempo changes much more in their music. It also includes a great guitar solo. brilliant guitar solo. Tiempos metálicos and brigadas metálicas up the tempo once more. Another highlight track is the closer, Hiena del Metal, which brings a collaboration with one of Argentina's legendary rock artists, Norberto Pappo Napolitano. A short and very fast track which also delivers another great guitar solo. Easily one of the most influential records in Argentina and the whole of the South American heavy metal scene. Almost finished. 3 more albums left and we now move to 1982 with the only Brazilian album on this list. I'm referring to the self-titled records by the band Stress, released independently. Formed all the way back in 1977, Stress are one of the oldest metal bands from Latin America. Their early years were not any different from other underground bands of the time in terms of dealing with scarce resources, little support, and general opposition from society. Their debut album is messy and aggressive. They claim it to be the first true thrash metal album, predating Kill 'Em All by a year. If you can get past the low-budget lo-fi approach, you'll find a lot of interesting stuff here, although this isn't for me thrash metal, but more influenced by up-tempo new wave of British heavy metal acts such as Tank, Warfare, Atomkraft, amongst others. And the first 2 tracks really encapsulate this kind of sound perfectly. From the 3rd to the 5th track, the sound changes a bit and we are treated to a more 70s hard rock sound reminiscent of bands such as Zeppelin and Purple. Then another 2 up-tempo metal tracks and the closing track, which is more kind of melodic and alternates softer passage to faster ones. As you can see, this album has a very nice balance of hard rock and speed metal, a time when the sound of heavy metal was still forging itself and therefore bands swayed from one side to the other, creating records which transmit different emotions, yet still feel cohesive. Those who have been following this series know that we have encountered a number of early 80s records like this one, bands which are still trying to find their own sound, so it kind of fluctuates between hard rock and metal. Quite possibly this is the first heavy metal record of Brazil and surely one of the most essential records from South America. And the last 2 records come both from a country which is not really synonymous with heavy metal, yet in 1981 gave birth to 2 magnificent records, both also released with Color Records, a label like others already mentioned with previous records who deserve a mention for having the courage and foresight to support heavy metal at such an early stage. The first one I'm going to speak about is the self-titled record by Arcangel. Starting out in 1978 as the hard rock band Power Age, they changed to a more heavy metal oriented sound in 1981 and are still active today, having gone through a few changes through the decades. The only original members still active are the Picozzi brothers on drums and guitar. Nowadays they play something more akin to power metal. This album has a strong hard rock residue with a raw edge. It's a great album that fans of Spanish bands like Baron Rojo and Obus are bound to enjoy. In fact, this album has a track called Baron Rojo. Not sure if they were influenced by the Spanish band, as they both released their debut in 1981. If you have never heard about these bands, again I have to mention the Spanish Metal Essential albums videos, which these bands are included in as well. All the music here is influenced by the new wave of British heavy metal with a mix of Motorhead as well. The biting, somewhat fuzzy sound, guitars, great solo, punkish drums, all emanate a DIY and working class attitude. The tracks Libertad and Asesino also show the uptempo hard rock influences of the band, while tracks like Hombre Robot, Nada es Eterno and Heroes Kaidos give off some Black Sabbath and proto-metal influences. Loco per el Rock and Roll is kind of that radio-friendly track with a repeated chorus which is an easy listen. So as you can see, this is a record which has something for most hard rock fans, and above all, it has that underlying metal feel going with it, which gives it that bite and energy. Favorite track here would be Assassino. Finished. And the last record, as I said, also from Venezuela and also released in 1981, and I bring you the album Hecho en Venezuela by the band Resistencia. Formed in 1977, they are surely one of the earliest heavy metal bands to form in Latin America. Bad production and the worst cover design couldn't cast a shadow on this band's quality, but while they were respected in their own country with live concerts and TV showings, they didn't reach the international success they really deserved. To this day, they remain criminally underrated outside of their relative region. Part of what makes this band so fantastic is their quality musicianship and their wide variety of sounds and lyrical themes, while always maintaining the straight-in-your-face, gritty metal sound. The closest comparisons I can think of are 70s Judas Priest and Rainbow, and maybe even early Raven, but Resistencia has quite a unique sound second to none. On stage, the band had an energetic presence and looked more like 70s hippies than a metal band actually. Their lyrics were quite diverse and sometimes even esoteric, with topics ranging from social protest to Dio-like prose, blending history, occultism and fantasy. Sadly, two crucial band members, Ricardo Escobar and Rodrigo Yoma, died several years ago. It's truly mind-boggling how none of their albums have been reissued in any format since they were released. The vocals on here are a mix of rough and somewhat operatic, with interesting song structures, aggressive and galloping riffs, raw production, tight musicianship, great melodies, and I could go on. Truly on par with some of the greatest traditional heavy metal albums of the late 70s and the early 80s. That great guitar solo closing the opening track, Hassan Ben Sabat, or the faster tracks like Templo de la Oscuridad or Tierra Prometida. Ángeles Cayendo has an intro similar to Siritungo's King of the Dead. Muerto en Vido is an uptempo track with a heavier side to it as well. And that powerful bass sound, which, as I always say, is so refreshing to hear along with other sounds of the band. Resistencia is another highlight, starting off with a nice guitar solo and then those strong yet melancholic vocals kick in. Let's hope that this and the rest of the records on here get the admiration that they really deserve. So those were my choices for today's video. I hope you get the opportunity to listen to all of these records, and please do, because they are really good. I would very much appreciate it if you could write down in the comments your opinions about them once you listen to them, or if you already know them. As usual, we have left some other important bands out, as 10 bands from 2 whole regions, South and Central America, is not easy, even though I'm restricting the choices here, as always, to 80s full-length records. Yet there were quite a good number of potential bands considering the social situations I mentioned in the introduction. Interesting to note as well that from the 10 bands I included 4 from Mexico. Some say that due to their proximity to the US, they were more likely to be influenced by them due to people traveling and between the two areas, and more possibility of acquiring vinyls, tapes, CDs. Well, Mexico was actually never short of heavy metal bands, so this geographical aspect for sure impacted on the whole Mexican scene. Anyways, don't forget to use the links in the description below, including the affiliate links. You get a small commission at no extra expense for you. Those links, you can use them for any purchase you prefer. Subscribe as well, click the bell, like the video and share it on social media. As always, help us out to reach more fellow metalheads.